Anyway, we're going to be dealing with the idea of trust, okay? Now, one thing you may not know about me is I'm a little bit of a history buff, and I can't not go into the history concepts and look up different things that kind of prove, what the Bible is trying to say and this type of thing. So, but I have a tendency to overdo it, okay? And I go on and on about this stuff, and they can kill off messages and stuff. But you'll have to forgive me today because I got into it and I couldn't help myself. So, we're going to start in Genesis 15 as we get to Exodus, chapter 5. Okay, I'll get there, but I got to kind of explain. It all matches. So we'll work it out. Okay? Let's take a look in Genesis chapter 15, verses 12 to 16. I'm kind of hoping you brought a Bible. We're not going to put it on the screen because I want to see if you guys actually know where these things are in the Bible, and get some paper, or you got a phone, you can look it up and see if I'm preaching heresy or everything's tracking. That's good. So anyway, let's go to Genesis chapter 15. That's way in the back, first book, verses 12 to 16. It's kind of a rah-rah chant for Abram, as God was talking to him. Verse 12, it says, "As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him." Little encouraging type of time. Okay? And then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation," so don't worry about it. Your family in the future is going to be enslaved for 400 years, but don't worry about it. I'll take care of the guys that did this to them. All right? "And afterwards, they will come out with great possessions." So, they'll be rich by the time they get out of it. But, the cost is you got 400 years of slavery. Okay? So, just to let you know that. "You, however," don't worry about it, he's saying, "you will go to your ancestors in peace." So you're going to die one day, but you're going to live long enough to be happy with how long you live, a good old age. "In the 4th generation, your descendants," so 4 gens, okay, and I don't know how God classifies generations per se, but he's taken the 100-year part, okay, where we'd probably say 3 or 4 gens are in that, right? So, in the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites have not yet reached its full measure. Okay, so the whole reason for this entire concept is the Amorites. Okay, and who are these guys? But they haven't done enough wrong yet. So I can't punish them right now. Okay, but in 400 years, we're all going to be ready, so don't worry about it. And we'll get the army ready to go. You're going to increase the numbers. You guys are going to be richer. And, so that's the reason I'm storing you over there, so we can get the Amorites in the land of Canaan type area in 400 years. Okay? How's that sound? Okay? If you heard this one, how would you react to that? Never mind. I'll just kind of pass on. Anyway, if we keep going on this, it says, "Then you'll see the story play out of Joseph." Okay, his brothers, so you have Isaac and then Jacob had a son named Joseph, and his brothers didn't like him, and so one day they got ticked off with him, sold him as a slave. Actually they were going to kill him, but then the older brother kind of felt bad for him, so they sold him as a slave over to Egypt. But this was all part of God's plan. All right, and Joseph went over there, became an all-star in the eyes of Pharaoh, and he rose in power and actually became second in command for all of Egypt. All right? And he was actually able to make a massive impact on the land of Egypt. Now, one thing we do know, all right, is that the Egyptian pharaohs at that time were actually from Abraham's background. Okay? There's some notions in history where those folks had migrated over and actually had taken over the southern part of Egypt. And their southern Egyptians were different than the northern Egyptians at that time, up by where the Nile spreads out in the crescent. And so there's a population, an ethnic group that were Egyptians, okay, but they weren't the same as the northern Egyptians. And when Joseph came into that area, it actually worked out pretty good because his background was very similar to the Egyptian backgrounds, and he was able to move in there quite easily, probably because of that. All right, and that's some of the things that is talked about. And if you take a look in Exodus chapter 1, this is where things start changing a little bit, right? It says, "Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came into power in Egypt. And that is what they're taking a look at for historians, is when the northern Egyptians took over the southern Egyptians and took over the whole rule of Egypt. All right? And these guys did not know about Joseph. Because, like, you got to remember, Joseph was like an all-star in that area. Because he shows up and he talks Pharaoh into saying, look, you got to save up some money and buy and incorporate all this. You got to set up the field, start growing some more food, store it and store it and store it, because there's famine coming. If you don't do this, everything's going to get wiped out. Now, before that, the pharaohs actually, well, they were kind of like in the United States, where there was a leader, but he only had so much money, and everybody else kind of did their own thing, having their own monies. Where after the time of pharaohs, and after this point, Pharaoh became the absolute leader of the whole thing, because people had to sell themselves in slavery to the king, the Pharaoh, because they didn't have any monies, and they sold their lands and they sold everything to stay alive during this long time of famine. Okay? But the whole thing was, like, everybody was just so happy with Joseph because he actually saved them. And they actually brought more power into Egypt at that time, because nations were coming there trying to get some more food off them, and they were flourishing while everybody else was dying off. Okay, so they actually rose to power quite heavily during that type of time. Okay? So here we get into Exodus chapter 1. And we'll actually go down all the way down to verse 12 from verse 8. It says, then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous if war breaks out. We'll join our enemies and fight against us and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. Okay? But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly, and they made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar, with all kinds of work in the fields. And in all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. Now, originally, the archaeologists had a hard time finding where the Israelites had actually settled. In fact, there's no evidence of that too much, because basically where the Israelites settled in the first spot was right up by the Nile that flooded all the time. And the Nile floods pretty well every year and wipes out huge sections. And so if you try to build anything around there, not happening. Okay, but you got to remember the Israelis were more tent and shepherds who were actually despised by the Egyptians. There's one thing the Egyptians really hated was sheep herders. They thought they were the lowest of the low. And so to have them out of town, out there, and these guys are in tents and stuff like that, they were quite happy to have them out there. All right? But they also kind of, they recognized what these people had done for them, and they actually they flourished in that area. But when this new king came along, he didn't understand Joseph. He didn't understand the whole thing of Israel. And so what he did is he enslaved them and brought them down to build the city down in Ramses, especially, right? And these are storage cities, and they were down up in the north, up closer to the Mediterranean, and this is where they were kind of put in there. Now, for years and years, archaeologists looked and looked and looked, and they couldn't find these cities, and they were actually saying the Bible's a hunk of junk because they can't find these cities, and we should be able to find these cities because Ramses statues are all over the place, and all this stuff is all over the place, but you can't find the cities. And then I think this is one part I'm not quite sure of. I looked and looked, and I just ran out of time. But I think it was in the 60s when they actually found the city of Ramses. There is this shepherd out there doing, I can't remember, shepherd or guy wandering around, finds a big, massive pair of feet. Okay, and it was kind of looked like one of the set of feet that on the Ramses statues that were all over the place. And sure enough, there's a little panel off to the side that explained that this was Ramses II. Okay, so this whole thing kind of started, and these guys started going crazy on their digs, and that whole area was uncovered. And it was only just under just a little bit of sand. It wasn't actually buried that deep, but only the bare minimum was recovered out of there. All right, and what historians basically said, because they had Ramses statues all over the place in Egypt, it was this place of storage. And when the Nile moved, they kind of came in and the Egyptians, the other leaders, came and took all this stuff that was valuable and used and built buildings everywhere else. But they stripped it right down to the foundation, and that's actually what's left in there in all the sites. Okay? The only reason I'm going over this is to say that what the Bible is actually talking about in this area is actually true and correct and historical, so that when we're learning things that are said, that we can say this is valid and part of what God is saying to us. All right? Now then, some of the archaeology, it says basically they went down and they found the cities down in the northern section. And, there's a couple of cool references to that. They found some other backup to it. They found a couple of documents in that area, in the digs, that referred to some Semitic slaves that had been caught, like kind of brought into slavery and building the city of Ramses. Okay, so that's been specific. And then also there's a clay tablet that was found, because you got to remember, like all the papyrus they used, all disintegrated. Like it just made of paper, it just went away for the most part, right? But the stuff made in brick and stuff, mind you, the Egyptian kings or pharaohs, when they carved everything into rock, every time they put stuff into rock, they'd erase other guys' names, they'd put their names up, and all the great things that they did. But it was like definitely one-sided promo. Like it was like, they could have lost a battle or something, but they said, we just killed them all. It was awesome. We devastated them. So it was like kind of, they had the rule on what their history was going to be left like, right? But anyway, this one clay tablet mentioned the people that were captured. They were called Habaru. Okay, that was on the clay tablet there. And the other part was talking about a Semitic tribe, which refers to the area in which the Jews came from. And so between those pieces of information, it actually looks like there's identification of the Jewish people that were there. Now, guys fight back and forth with it all the time, but the other cool thing, and there's a few things, I'm going to stop it with this, okay, but one of the cool things is one of the Egyptologists, the only Egyptologist I know that's a Christian, all right, he actually went and studied the root words of a bunch of names and stuff like that of some of the things in the Bible that were displayed from Moses. Actually, Moses' name, his root name means one who was born, okay? And it is the same root word that comes up with the name Ramses. It's the same root word. And remember, he was in Ramses' family, right? Because his sister adopted him and brought him into the family. And that name actually matches very well with the whole thing. Okay? All right, enough of the interesting facts. There's a few more things, but it's getting a little bit over the top. Okay, so the story of Moses goes, when he runs into God, he's actually skeptical about the whole thing. And God talks to him, I want you to go to Egypt and give this message. Moses is not thrilled with this entire concept. He went, 40 years ago, he came from that area, he knows it, and he says, I don't want to go back. I don't want to do this. And God's, probably being patient with him at that point. And I think it wasn't really until he actually was given his staff and he got to perform some miracles that he got a little bit of courage, but even then he's going, I don't really want to do this. And so, his brother was sent to him and encouraged him, so they went. Okay, but God actually got to the point where he started to get mad at Abraham, and actually, not Abraham, but Moses, and actually just about did him in. Okay, if you read that passage. Very interesting passage. But let's pick it up in Exodus chapter 4. We'll go from verse 29 down to 31. And this is just before chapter 5. So we're getting close to the message. We're coming. So it says, Moses and Aaron. Are you guys there? Exodus chapter 4. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites. And Aaron told them everything. Not Moses, Aaron. And the Lord had said to Moses. And he also performed the signs before the people. And they believed. And when they had heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. So we're going to actually pick up and take a look at chapter 5. And we're going to read the whole thing. And because there's some really good points that we can pick out of here. So that's chapter 5, verse 1. We'll start in. It says, after Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, let my people go. Now, interesting, they didn't stop there, right? What did they say here at the end? They said, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. That's quite an interesting way of putting it, right? So let's go for a few days and we want to have a church service outside. Now, why was that said? Now, you have to remember the Egyptians did not have a 7-day work week. Okay, they didn't work 5 days, take 2 days off. They didn't do that. All right, they had 10-day units. They had 30 days in their calendar. All right, 10 work days each time they switched. They had no days off. Like, you did not get a day off unless there was a religious festival or a prayer time or something that needed to happen for your religion that Pharaoh recognized. Okay? And if Pharaoh didn't recognize it, you didn't get a day off. You worked 10, 10, and 10. Okay, you've heard of a shift 10 on, 10 off? Yeah, no. Or 7 on, 7 off? 4 on, 4 off? No. This is 10, 10, and 10. And that just means you didn't get it. So unless the Israelis went, occultic and followed the Egyptian religion, they didn't get a day off. Was that motivation? I don't know. Let's get into this here. It's verse 2, it says, Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. And then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. I want to introduce a new religion to you. There's a new God. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. And then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working. Did Pharaoh respond really well? Okay, so you have this whole situation where God came and talked to Moses, and he said, I want you to go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And then he, Moses struggles with this. He gets proved with miracles as we're supposed to be doing. And still Moses is kind of going, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't talk really well. By the way, in Acts it says that Moses actually talks really well. Or is that Corinthians? I figured it out later. Anyway, then what happened was Aaron came up to Mount Sinai. So somehow he was able to escape the whole slavery thing, go back into the desert and meet with his brother, and then they go back in. It's all rah-rah. They talk to the people of Israel that time. They're like, yes, let's go do it. And they walk into Pharaoh, and Pharaoh goes, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Right? So this is kind of where they are. In fact, Pharaoh kind of seemed a little hostile. Verse 6, that same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers, the overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy, and that is why they are crying out. Let us go sacrifice to our God. Make the work harder for the people so they keep working and paying attention to paying attention to lies. And the slave drivers and the overseers went out and said to the people, this is what Pharaoh says, I will not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all. So there was quota that they had to produce, right? And you got to remember this: they were Egyptian overseers. Okay, and that's established, and they went and discussed it with the leaders of the Israelites. This is what needs to happen. And so the people scattered all over Egypt. So they went into panic mode, going into all the fields, trying to find some more straw. And this was on the overtime. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, complete the work required for you each day, just as when you had straw. And Pharaoh's slave drivers beat the Israelite overseers. Okay, that's the Israeli leaders. So you got to see there's structure within the Israeli encampment as well, right? And they had pointed, demanding, why haven't you met your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before? Then the Israeli overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh, which is quite interesting that they were able to actually go that route, right? Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told make bricks. Your servants are being beaten but the fault is with your own people. Pharaoh said, lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, let's go and sacrifice to the Lord. That's, he's referring to Moses and Aaron, and he's trying to split the two, right? And he's quite successful at that. He says, now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. And the Israelite overseers realized they were in trouble. And when they were told, you are not to reduce the number of bricks required for you each day. Slavery just sounds fun, eh? Can you imagine, you probably had bosses like that, but you quit, right? You don't get to quit this one. This is your full-time gig, and they own everything that you have, and they own you, and they own your family, actually, right? You're a thing. That he actually lets you talk to him is pretty impressive. Genesis 5, verse 20 to 23. This is kind of what I want to talk about a little bit. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them, and they said, may the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. This is phenomenal politics, right? Did Pharaoh know how to push the buttons to fix this? Oh yeah. This was an easy move for him, right? Moses returned to the Lord and said, why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. Think about it, folks. Like I said before, put yourself in their shoes. You're a slave. They can beat you anytime they want. In fact, they can kill you anytime they want. They can rape your daughters. They can take your sons. They can do whatever they want with whatever you have and whoever you are. This is not a good scenario to be in. Like, you want to talk about a frightening social disposition? This would be it. We as Canadians do not get this one. Like, we do not understand how much pressure. Like, if we have a bad boss and he stresses us out, we got to go on meds for about 2 months just to kind of recover from that. These guys didn't have any meds, let's just put it that way. But they probably got tough over the years and how they're dealing with things. Think of the generational effect that this has. Yeah, 400 years. What kind of people does this produce? Sean was last week, he was talking about how if you're in a bad situation, that can actually get you to review where you're at with God, right? These people were well prepped for that. They'd be talking, God, where are you? What have you done? One of the main questions that comes up with this is probably, God, are you still on our side? Are you still our God? Why is it the Egyptians have it so good and we have it so bad? If we're your people, why is this happening? That's a question that would come out on a regular basis. Probably questions we ask when we run into trouble. Right? The issue is trust. I was a youth pastor for about 20 years. Okay? That means I got to do all sorts of idiotic things I've never been held accountable for, and games and different things. As long as no one died, it was a successful event. All right? And so one of the things I used to do when teaching the concept of trust was I would we'd have 50, 70 kids in the Bible study, and I'd say, okay, guys, we're going to talk on trust. And one of the main things I would always do is, okay, who trusts me here? Guys put up their hands. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to come up here and get blindfolded, and we're going to do something. say, do you trust me still? And so once in a while you get a kid puts his hand up, and so what I'd do is I'd come over to like here or something, and I'd have a big box set up, and I'd get him to stand on the box. How many of you have been in a youth group that did this stupid thing? No? Okay, so then what you do is you get them up there and you blindfold them, right? So they have no idea what's going on. And I said, I'd like you to cross your arms and put your feet together. Okay, that's why you don't want uncoordinated people ever kind of on stage with things. Bad things. But what they didn't know is that I had 6 really strong, I tried to get men, okay? Grade 9s wouldn't pull it for just depending on who it was, you know, I'd get them up there, I'd squeeze them in, and I'd get them to link hands, link arms, okay, underneath. So they'd put their arms in behind them, they'd stand in 2s and create a line. And we're talking strong guys. But the reason I'd get them to link arms is because some of these guys would try to catch them individually, and once in a while, you know, someone would slip through the hand. It wouldn't be good. So, because what I would do is I'd say, I want you to cross your hands, I'd like you to fall backwards. That's trust. Is that trust? That's trust. Would I do this? Not with a youth group. No. But they wouldn't hear the guys walking up because they'd sneak up. Now, their actions were very funny all the time. I mean, some people, they would cross their arms and they'd go back, and they'd kind of, they'd bend their knees and they'd kind of reach out, you know, or you get guys going, really? And they'd listen, but the guys would remain quiet. And some would go, okay, Mel. And they just go straight back. That, folks, is what trust is. And the guys would catch them. All right? No one died on any of these things. You know? But if I wasn't so... If anybody knows me, after 20 years of youth, I'm the most paranoid individual in the entire planet when it comes to accident-prone things going on. Like, it's truly, a good event is when a child lives through the event and it's all good. Okay? Because I've seen too many things happen too many times. And if you're a parent, you know that too. Right? So for you even to see your kids fall back, you would have to have trust in that scenario. And it would be brutal watching it because your child could die in the process or get hurt, right? This is the trust. This concept of trust is what God wants us to have in terms of our relationship with Him, highly established. It's called faith. Right? We have a hard time doing this, but say you've had 400 years of falling on the ground. Or at least that's how you perceive it. Where's your faith level at? You've been hurt. You've had a brutal life for 400 years. You've had multi-generations. In fact, your father's father's father is a mess because these guys beat him up so bad. And he caused your family to have junk. Generation, it just passes down. Are you happy about all this? What's your context? Do you trust God is with you? You know, even Moses, okay, if you take a look at this whole thing, you know, in the beginning of this deal, Moses was even, and the Israelites were mildly enthusiastic about this whole concept, right? Yeah, let's go. But how deep was their faith? I mean, the first little turn, I mean, you know, this whole thing is, do you believe God is able to take out the Egyptians after this long? Do you think God is able to do this? Yes, I've seen miracles. My stick turns into a snake. Right? That's what he's holding on to. My brother Aaron came out to meet me in the desert and I didn't even talk to him. Unreal. Let's go. The people of Israel, they just had 400 years of junk. There's a prophecy way back in the day that it's 400 years. Probably some of the literature made it through, at least the oral of it did for sure, right? That any of the Israelites could have grabbed onto to hear about this in 400 years. All we got to do is last 400 years. And they're looking at the time, hey, I think it's close to the 400 years. I think it's close. And they're looking for something. And here comes Moses. And they go, rah, rah. But the faith or the trust is not there. And as soon as the first things go wrong, they melt. Right? This is difficult, yeah. Here we go. We see that although Pharaoh, kind of reacted not bad with, he said no, but he didn't go kill Moses and Aaron, right? He kind of did a political move that was fairly significant. It actually it was a very successful political move. The Israeli leaders now despised Moses and Aaron. There's a huge rift, right? The people of Israel, well, the thing that gets me with Israel, and I don't blame him on this one to a degree, because, what's worse? That you live in misery your whole life, or you have a little bit of hope, a little shine of getting out of the misery, and then that fails too? Would you rather just stay in the misery, or do you want a little hope that crashes in the process? What would be worse? Yeah. You'd rather stay in the misery and not know there's a way out, and then suffer a little bit more in the process of that thought that went down. The people of Israel had a chip on their shoulders because of all the junk that was happening around them. And they had, I can't even imagine the atrocities that took place during that time. Right? Look at the Holocaust. There's another section with the Israeli people. Eh? There's been a lot of people over the years that I know that have really had a lot of junk in their life, and they respond different ways. I know a guy right now, he's got cancer, and he's not doing well. He's really not doing well. And his family is just crushed around him. But he's at peace with everything, and he's all good. But then I know of a guy one time, I knew him out of Vernon. Now he's backing out of his driveway, and he ran over his daughter, killed her. Family broke up. Everything split. They all used to go to church. Don't do that anymore. Things are just brutal. Compared to someone who's dying of cancer, you could also react the same way. I know a lady, married a guy a long time. Then she found out, and they had grown kids getting married, the whole 9 yards, found out that he had an ongoing relationship with another woman for, it was 10, 12 years or something. During the whole time they were married, he had this other woman going on. When this all came about, how'd she respond? Well, she actually grew in Christ, and the joy that took place with her in Jesus was amazing. And she had grace about the whole thing. He divorced her and kind of took off with this woman, but the church came around her, but it was just night and day, from what a normal person would understand or expect, right? I know another lady, she's had several husbands, and they all died on her. They keep dying on her. Cancer or accidents and stuff, there's a side joke, don't be marrying her, you're going down next, right? But think about her in that, and her children in the process. But she loved Jesus, and was doing well in that. It was hard. She's probably not as joyful as some. But you want to talk about a witness to the community around her? Unreal. Because the Spirit of God was working in her heart, and she actually really had a true walk with God, and it showed that even in her circumstances, God was blessing. It was actually something very, very beautiful. A lot of people, when they run into these scenarios, they get loud and obnoxious, and they cut everybody down all over the place. Other people just get emotional, and they're messes. And they loop out. It's just unreal. They're up and down so far, you don't know where they're going. Other people just kind of, they go into a dungeon type mode, and they don't want to see anybody, and they hide out. Other folks start, going through things logistically, and they start trying to blame God or blame all the different people and trying to figure out why everything has gone so wrong. But there's opposites to that. If the Holy Spirit is involved, the same personalities, instead of being loud and nasty about God, speak about His greatness in their suffering. Other people rejoice in their suffering, to represent God. Other folks become more personal, and they go pity other people more and they go pursue ways of doing ministry during this time. Other people are able to kind of define greatly what the truth of God is all about. There's such a divide in terms of how we respond to some of the junkiest areas of our lives, just depending on where our faith with God is. And I got pastored for a lot of years, guys. Because it seems that way. And you see night and day how people respond to different things. And I've been able to be in people's lives. I've been in conversations where most people don't get to go. And some folks, during their toughest times, are the biggest blessings and biggest representatives of Christ. And others, they're almost lost and they have no faith. Moses, he responded, like he got caught up with God after. If you look in chapter 6, the beginning of that, God said, don't worry about it. And it reminded him of a few things, right? Like you think Moses would, like basically, in the earlier chapter, earlier chapters, God told Moses, and he made this very blunt statement. He said, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So when I present him with this opportunity, he's going to turn it down, and I'm going to make sure I harden his heart so he doesn't say yes. You think Moses would have clued in on that one, right? But he didn't, because he was so emotionally attached with the people of Israel, and he got embarrassed in front of everybody, and this whole big rah-rah thing was supposed to be happening, and he didn't hear what God had actually said. And when God told him about all this and renewed him, Moses was okay, but the people of Israel weren't. In fact, you got to remember, they didn't even get to go in the promised land. How come? They were given the opportunity, but they did not have the faith. And so they had to wait for the next gen to come up before they'd be allowed in to the promised land. They never did make it. One of the things that we need to kind of understand, and this is not part of our Canadian culture, but God looks at us totally different than we as Canadians look at the world. Like he knows all of us. Okay, you have to understand. He knows who we are. He says he even knows the number of hairs that are on our head. Right? He knows every detail about us. Yet there's a few of us, don't you think? There's a few of us on the earth. Okay, so you know detail, but you know massive amount of people. Like he knows everybody on the earth right now at that level. He knows all the people of the past at that level, and he knows all the people in the future of that level. Okay. He's a little bit bigger than us. Do you think his thinking patterns are a little bigger than ours? Like what do we look at? We look at our job, we look at our family, we might look at our kids if they're around. Maybe the grandkids, but that's about as far as it goes. I don't even want to see the great-grandkids. Like I just figured out a few years ago, I'm not getting out of this family thing. Like kids leave the house, but then they're coming back, they're getting more kids. Like this, I'm going to be dealing with these guys till I die, right? But that's a very small package in comparison to what God deals with. And so when God makes statements and decisions, he's actually not just dealing with our little personal zone. He's dealing with a little bit bigger picture, right? And we need to incorporate that into our thinking and recognize our size to God in the whole picture. Not that we're this big thing in his eyes. We are surprisingly even recognized by him, and he loves us. Like how he pulls that off, I don't know. But we need to recognize that he has a little bit bigger things happening than just us in this world. And our job is not to get things from him, but to serve him. We are his servants. That's what a Christian does. We serve him. Look at Christ's life. Was that a great life in terms of what happened? Yeah. The disciples, they had a rah-rah, right? Like look at their timelines. Look what happened to these guys. All these guys except John got murdered, basically. Right? And tortured. Right? But were they happy during the whole process? Yeah. Were they joyful during the whole process? Yeah. Did they have peace during the whole process? Yeah. But would you have chosen that life? No. No. I don't want that. I get paid a nice wage. I live in a house. I'm in Canada. No one's trying to hurt me. This is all good. Right? Get to feed my family. Things are going generally well. There's no real problems going on. You get different, federal governments and different provincial governments. Whoop-de-doo. It's not bad. Right? But it seems like we, especially in Canada, United States, Europe, different times, something bad happens to us. God just can't be a good God. Like, think about this. Remember back in Genesis 15? Let's turn back there. Genesis 15. We started off with this passage. He's talking to Abraham. Right? And he says, okay, your guys are going to go, certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. Okay, so we're going to move all of your descendants for 400 years over there, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But don't worry, I'll punish the nation they serve as slaves. And afterwards, when that whole crew comes out of there, they're going to have a lot of money. Right? And at the end of it, you take a look at all the Egyptians just throwing them gold. Just get out of here. You are a curse to us. We need you out. Here, I'll give you $10. Get out of here. But they got out of that whole area of Egypt with a ton of money from the Egyptians. Right? Pharaoh is defeated. Everything is justified. You, however, will go to your ancestors' peace, bird, good others. But let's go down to 16. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not reached its full measure. Like the blocks of people God is talking about in this zone, and why he actually had Israel where they were for that entire time, has nothing to do with a bunch of individuals and their problem with their mother and father. Notice? And when they went into the land of Canaan, they took over that whole area, and God said, make sure you kill every man, woman, and child there. Most people don't like talking about that. Why did God do that? It's because the Amorites and these type of guys are so stinking evil that if they got let loose, God knew the ramifications of that for the whole world. And so he sent Israel in there at that time to deal with that. Was that a nice thing to do? No. But was it better than the flood? Yes. But God has massive plans. Like, we haven't been to war. Like, really, on our homeland? We have no idea in Canada. We are 150 years old. There's a few things that have happened on the earth, and we are secluded from a ton of the junk that takes place. Give us a little bit. We'll probably get there. Right? I guess the point I'm trying to make is that God looks at whole big blocks of things. He looks at the entire world and making decisions. He looks at entire nations making decisions. If you're Canadian, you are a Canadian. What happens in Canada affects you. There can be a decision made from God Almighty about Canada, and you are incorporated in that decision, good, bad, or ugly. Right? Same thing with Europe. Same thing with the Middle East. Same thing with all these things. And if we are part of that people group, which I think that we as Canadians, we all just think of ourselves as individuals, and we are not. We are tied together. Our families are tied together. Our generations, like, do you really care what happens to your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather? Or grandkid? You don't even know these guys. Do you really care? Or how about your great-great-great-great-grandfather? Like I said that before. Like, do you actually care about the span, or is it just your father and your kids? Maybe your grandkids. That's maybe the biggest part of the scope we have. That's a very, very small picture. God does not think like that. He's an eternal God. Here's a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And I think in these type of scenarios, this is good advice. And this is what God talks with Corinthians about. He says, each person should remain in the situation they were in. This is verse 20 of chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians. It says, each person should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although if you can gain your freedom, do so. For the one who is a slave when called to faith in the Lord is the Lord's freed prisoner. Okay? Because you were given freedom in your soul whether you're actually free or not. So you were to flourish where you are. Right? Don't go pursue great things that would change your whole... you have your Moses, he moves from here to here, or you have, different prophets go, or Paul went to different lands. He's not saying, okay, nobody can move anywhere, you have to stay exactly where you are. That's not what it's talking about. But it's saying the things that you are driven for is not really supposed to be for your personal development, it's for the pursuit of God. The serving of Him in the process. And you probably can do good right where you are in your current circumstances. That's what he's saying. For the one who is a slave when called to faith, the Lord is the Lord's freed person. Similarly, the one who is free when called is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of human beings, because you could choose to be a slave if you wanted to for a certain price. Brothers and sisters, each person, as responsible to God, should remain in the situation they were in then when God called them. Basically he's saying things are as they are. God knows where you're at. You have come to know Him at this point. Make use of what you have around you. Don't try to struggle and put all your energies to get out of where you're at. Make use of where you're at the time. Be relevant to those that are around you at this point. Have an impact on the world from where you are, because that is where you have your greatest ability to do something and serve Him. And the thing is, you say, what if I'm in a bad situation? The situation is not the issue, folks. You don't run from a bad situation if you have God's power in you. It says in Galatians chapter 5, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. This is what God gives us if we follow Him, regardless of what is around us, regardless of what we're in. Because He's real. And His Spirit works inside us and does stuff that is totally abnormal to the world around us. And that's why we're able to follow Him regardless of any consequence or situation that is just in our vicinity. Right? There's a great passage in Isaiah that gives me encouragement during times when it's tough. And it's a neat little passage in Isaiah chapter 40. It's a big book in the middle of the Bible there a little bit. You can probably find that. Isaiah chapter 40. We're going to read verses 28 down to 31. Verse 28, it says, do you not know, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. His understanding no one can fathom. You do not understand what He understands. And you can't even grasp what He understands. So don't go there. He gives strength to the weary, and He increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not be faint. Because the situation you have around you is not what gives you strength. It is our Lord Jesus. And if you follow Him, He will be there with you. The cool thing about the eagle is if you, I live down around Houston and stuff, and there's just a ton of eagles for those guys. But eagles, have you ever been down to Prince Rupert? You guys ever seen all those things go down there? Never mind. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them that seen them down there. But when a storm comes up, they all fly up to the highest area they can possibly get to. And when the storm comes into the area where it's really rough, if it's a really bad storm, you know what eagles do? They fly up against the wind and they use the wind to pop them up over top of the storm. And they ride the storm out, but they ride on top of the storm. And this is a very similar description to what the Holy Spirit does with those of us who follow Him during tough times. This is a very valuable concept, folks, and I think it's important for us to get this. It's a neat thing. And if you've followed Christ for long and you have walked in His Spirit, you've experienced these times. Those of us that have generational impact on us that have not fully released that or given that to Jesus can find some real hard stuff that you got to plow through. And sometimes we get negative reactions out of that because we take our eyes off the Lord. Our encouragement to you folks this morning is that you keep your eyes on Him and that you pursue Him regardless of the cost or the consequence that you see coming at you. And He'll lift you above those clouds that are wiping everybody out. And you can go through the 400 years of slavery and have joy in your life. And you can have impact on this world. It's really quite a thing. I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to try to sing you a song here. Okay? Because it's a song that kind of was put on my heart. And it kind of, you guys may know it. I don't know. I try to ask in the back there. And I'm going to borrow a guitar. I think is it your guitar? Is it okay? Okay. And this will be fun. If you guys know this, help me out. That'd be good. Been walking down the same old road for miles and miles. Been hearing the same old voice of the same old lies. If you're trying to fill the same holes inside, there's a better life. There's a better life. If you got pain, He's a pain taker. If you feel lost, He's a way maker. If you need freedom or saving, He's a prison shaking Savior. If you got chains, He's a pain breaker. We've all searched for the light of day in the dead of night. We've all found ourselves worn out from the same old fights. We've all run to things we know just ain't right. There's a better life. There's a better life. If you got pain, He's a pain taker. If you feel lost, He's a way maker. If you need freedom or saving, He's a prison shaking Savior. If you got chains, He's a chain breaker. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can feel it, somebody testify. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can feel it, somebody testify, testify. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can feel it, somebody testify. If you got pain, He's a pain taker. If you feel lost, He's a way maker. If you need freedom or saving, He's a prison shaking Savior. If you got chains, He's a chain breaker. If you need freedom or saving, He's a prison shaking Savior. If you got chains,